We've been told for decades that fiber is essential for a healthy life, but what if that's just not true? Today, I'm breaking down the science that turns this nutrition rule upside down and shows why meat can fuel long, healthy lives without a single gram of fiber. Hey, everybody, I'm Marc Bates. I'm a metabolic health coach, and this is part of my Roasting Sacred Cows of Nutrition videos. Fiber is not essential. The science they don't want you to hear. Okay, this came from a comment from one of my videos, recent videos, and let's just look at the comment itself. Laughable. Meat does not provide all of the nutrients that human bodies need and require to live long and healthy. As you know, 80 to 90% of premature preventable deaths in our Western world are now caused by non-communicable chronic diseases. The big four: type 2 diabetes, CVD, cardiovascular disease, dementia, and several cancers coming on younger. You are in dispute with authorities, including Mayo Clinic and Harvard Health Sciences, which determines natural soluble insoluble fiber, right, or fibers, are essential for every long-term healthy human body. Fiber is in plant food, not so in meat. This is from Dr. John T., international chronic disease researcher. In all due deference to Dr. John T., who has an MD and is a well-known uh, commenter in Australia, right? You don't know what you're talking about. Okay? So, thank you for raising this. It's a good question. But let's separate what's essential for human biology from what's optional. And we got to make sure that we're taking this in proper context. The other thing, you'll notice that he does a logical fallacy, which is he appeals to authority. I'm in dispute with Mayo Clinic and Harvard Health Sciences. How am I in dispute with them? Cite me the actual sources of that I dispute. Show me the studies they have. They don't have any that actually demonstrate that this is healthy. And we'll cover all that. So we're going to look at the actual science. All right? Hang on. This is going to be a wild ride, folks. Okay, fiber is not biologically essential. In nutrition science, essential means a nutrient whose absence produces a definable deficiency disease for which an RDA, right, can be set. For example, vitamin C or essential amino acids. Fiber does not meet that bar. The National Academy set only an adequate intake, AI, for total fiber based on observational links. They're not causal, they're just, they ask questionnaires, say, oh, it seems like fiber does good for you, to endpoints like heart disease and stool bulk. Stool bulk, right? Like I care about that. Not on the physiological requirement or a deficiency syndrome, right? No biological reason you need this. Their own text says dietary and functional fibers are not essential nutrients. Data were inadequate to determine an EAR or RDA, which is like a minimum required amount. So an AI was developed, right? If fiber were truly essential, you'd expect randomized trials to show hard protection against colorectal neoplasm, among other diseases. Two of the largest RCTs, right, which is randomized control trials, found that neither adding wheat bran fiber nor adopting a low-fat, high fiber fruit and veg diet reduced, right, the recurrence of these problems, right? And that was in the New England Journal of Medicine. So the bottom line here, fiber can be useful for some outcomes, which we'll talk about, in some people, but it's not biologically essential in the way vitamins, minerals, and essential amino acids and essential fatty acids are. So much for the authority claim. All right, let's keep moving on. What actually drives chronic diseases? Because he made a big claim about chronic diseases. Across the cardiometabolic disease spectrum, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and quite a few of the dementias. The central pathology is metabolic dysfunction, specifically insulin resistance, chronic hyperinsulinemia, and ectopic fat accumulation in the liver and pancreas, which is energy toxicity, right? This is a twin cycle mechanism, Excess energy go, goes into excess liver fat, which goes into hepatic insulin resistance, which becomes hyperinsulinemia, which becomes pancreatic fat, which turns into beta cell failure. Reducing the glycemic insulin load and clearing liver pancreas fat reverses this cycle. Okay? And I got plenty of resources on that. This is why nutritional ketosis, very low carb, carnivore leaning, can be so powerful. It cuts the glucose insulin demand, lowers de novo lipogenesis, and facilitates loss of hepatic pancreatic fat, the mechanisms most tightly tied to disease progression, right? For context, the WHO, right, who's another one of those health authorities that I don't agree with a lot, but here's one where they make a good statement. 74 to 75% of global deaths are attributed to non-communicable diseases. Diet-driven metabolic risks are the core drivers. The WHO says metabolic risks are the core driver. Okay? So, take your authority figures and do what you want with them. Reversing diabetes with keto and very low carb. Okay, so let's talk about one of my favorite studies and organizations, which is the Virta Health's studies and their methods. So Virta Health model is not a fad. It's a structured continuous care intervention. Telemedicine plus health coaching plus personalized very low carb diet targeting nutritional ketosis, measuring beta hydroxybutyrate, physician supervised deprescribing, which means getting you off of medications, and biomarker tracking. The outcomes. In a 2-year peer-reviewed results, this can be found in Frontiers in Endocrinology in 2019. HbA1c, fasting glucose, insulin weight, triglycerides, blood pressure, liver enzymes, all improved. Use of any glycemic medication, excluding metformin, fell from 55 to 28%, with insulin dropping 62%, and critically 53.5% achieved diabetes reversal. 53% achieved diabetes reversal, which meant they had an HbA1c under 6.5% with no meds or only a small amount of metformin. 17.6% achieved remission, numbers unheard of in usual care. Okay, a 5-year extension, which is published in Diabetes Research and Clinical Practice in 2024. Among completers, 20% remained in remission and 32.5% were in complete reversal with sustained weight loss, right? Lower triglycerides, higher HDL, and markedly reduced medication burden, all while maintaining safety. This is long-term, durable disease modification, not a short-term trick. If we're serious about cutting the chronic disease burden, we should champion approaches that actually normalize glycemia, deprescribing meds, and sustain outcomes. Virta's framework does exactly that, and this is exactly what I teach for the most part. Okay? He said meat doesn't provide all the nutrients. Well, let's be very precise about that. All essential amino acids and essential fatty acids are abundant and highly bioavailable in animal source foods. Protein quality indices, the DIAAS, and I've got a whole series of videos on that study and why that study was so important, consistently rank animal proteins above most plant proteins, meaning better indispensable amino acid delivery per calorie. Okay? Key micronutrients, heme iron, zinc, B12, retinol, true vitamin A, right? Not beta carotene. Choline, long chain omega-3s, DHA, and EPA are richer and more bioavailable in animal foods, organ meats, and seafood. In particular, are nutrient dense, right? So these animal foods are nutrient dense, which means per 100 gram of cooked beef liver provides massive B12, folate, retinol, choline, plus small but real vitamin C, far above zero, which is what everyone says. No, you get plenty of vitamin C in meat. Now, let's be very clear about this. The reason that the RDA on vitamin C is so high is that it's based on having a very high carb diet. Carbohydrates and vitamin C use the same cellular transport methodology, which is the GLUT4 transport into the cell. And so if you're eating a high carb diet, you're occupying all the GLUT4 transports with carbs. The vitamin C can't get through unless you have a whole bunch of extra of it floating around. If you're not eating the carbs, you're not blocking the GLUT4 transports. The vitamin C naturally in meat get right into the cell. You don't need a lot of vitamin C. Your body does a great job with just what's in there. What animal foods don't contain in fiber, but again, fiber is not essential. And the AI was set for epidemiological reasons. Epidemiological is a method of study that uses essentially questionnaires and tries to find correlations, but there's all kinds of fault with that. I mean, Dr. Richard Feynman, who I follow religiously, talks about how 50% or more of nutritional studies are just plain faulty because they follow epidemiological rules, which are not built for nutritional studies, but built for tracking uh, disease, vector diseases, right? Uh, so it's using the wrong science and the wrong statistical work on there, right? Uh, so any reason they find for plant fiber cannot be linked to deficiency disease, right? So there is no RDA for fiber. If someone chooses a carnivore leaning ketogenic pattern that includes ruminant meat, eggs, seafood, and optionally organ meats, all essential nutrients can be met. Individuals with limited sun exposure might still supplement vitamin D because your best source of vitamin D is skin exposure to the sunlight, but that's true for many patterns all across the world. All right? Let's talk about the Harvard, Mayo, and fiber is essential comment. Respectfully, the National Academics DRI documents, not universities' blogs, define what's essential. As noted, fiber carries an AI, not an RDA, explicitly because it's not essential and because evidence linking fiber to cancer prevention is unresolved. In other words, they can't find a causal link. Large RCTs have failed to demonstrate fiber prevents any recurrence of any of these issues. Okay? And yes, the field needs some humility and about conflicts and historical biases, right? A well-documented case, though, keep this in mind. A well-documented case in the internal sugar industry documents revealed that in the 1960s, right, at the height of the eat sugar, don't eat fats controversies in this country, right, showed that industry payments influenced Harvard investigators to downplay sugar's role in coronary disease while shifting focus to fat. Now, we're going to be politically correct and say that they paid these guys to influence them to change. I call it a bribe. That's what the words I use, okay? And this fact was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, right? Back then. This whole controversy was uncovered in a 2016 JAMA Internal Medicine analysis. It took that long, okay? 1960s to 2016 for the truth to come out. This doesn't make today's Harvard scientists bad, but it does remind us that industries who fund most of the research will heavily influence the outcome of that research because they're paying for it. Okay? You gotta be very careful with that stuff. All right, let's go on. This wasn't brought up by the good doctor, but I hear this a lot. Well, the China study, right, was a slam dunk. It showed that meat was bad for you and you needed to eat vegetables and lots of fiber. Well, the China Cornell Oxford project is an ecological group level correlations, right, which meant that they gave out a lot of questionnaires that cannot establish causation for individuals. The classic ecological fallacy, right? Yeah, I can give you, and depending on how badly you fill out the questionnaire will determine how bad the data is, right? It inferred animal foods equated to disease. from country-level correlations, which violates basic epidemiologic rules. At best, such data generate hypotheses that must be tested in controlled designs, right? You can't use epidemiological studies to prove causation. You had to actually get into real hard science. When higher quality evidence appraises red meat risks, absolute effects are small and certainly low, right? And once again, even these high quality studies have lots of faults in them. Because what is red meat? One study equated processed foods, salami and pepperoni, as red meat. No one's going to tell you that salami and pepperonis are health foods, okay? Right? Leading to weak recommendations about reducing intake. This is nowhere near the categorical claims often made about the China study. All right? So keep that in mind. All right. Can you have gut health without plant fiber? So even without high fiber, colonic and endocrine enteroendocrine physiology adapt in ketosis. Colon sites efficiently oxidize ketone bodies. Endogenous butyrate production is not the only fuel pathway, and GLP-1 signaling can be modulated via microbial and host peptides independent of plant fiber. And I just released a video on GLP and PYY signaling and how you can do that by reducing your carbohydrate intake drastically, right? A recent Nature microbiology study identified bacteria-derived peptides that robustly stimulate GLP-1. And y'all know GLP-1, that's what's in Ozempic. That's what they're pushing those really expensive drugs for. And improve metabolic markers in rodents. So you got to be careful about that. It's a rodent study. Illustrating fiber-independent endocrine modulation, right? So, not a human study. Got to keep that in mind. But the studies I quote on my GLP-1 PYY video are human-based studies. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right. Let's be fair. Let's be balanced, right? If someone thrives on a ketogenic carnivore diet with normalized HbA1c, weight and blood pressure, normalized triglycerides, normalized liver enzymes, and fewer or no meds, there is no evidence, absolutely none, that adding 25 to 35 milligrams a day of plant fiber is necessary for long-term health. Those select individuals, specific people, may find specific fibers helpful for comfort. For example, helping bile acid binding if they experience bile acid diarrhea. And I do promote. So if you watch any of my fiber videos, I do talk about that. There are select fibers that, for specific reasons and for very targeted time frames, you may want to take if you're on a ketogenic or carnivore diet. But this gross eat 25 to 35 grams of just fiber, it's absolutely a worthless conjecture. If someone prefers plants, so if you're going to eat plant foods and you're going to still maintain a higher carb intake, then, and you're not following a low carb protein forward template, right? So then you still might have, and so your diet is built on non-starchy veg and targeted fibers, that may be very helpful to you, okay? But remember, once you get back into the high carb, starchy vegetables, grains and all that stuff, while eating some fiber may be helpful, it's a band-aid. The problem is eating the high starch and the carbs in the wheat and the grains, okay? Even today, the American Diabetes Association now acknowledges that reducing carbohydrate intake has the most evidence for improving glycemia and can be a viable strategy when deprescribing is a priority, which means getting you off of meds, right? So keep that in mind. Even the ADA cannot hide the truth that low carb is the way to go. All right. Hopefully you found that interesting. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please leave that in the appropriate section. We're building a community here. I'm here to answer your questions. Remember, this whole video came because somebody left me a comment Now, they were a little snarky in their comment, but they left me a comment. And I do several videos when people ask me actual real questions. And I want to give you the truth. So, or at least evidence, right? So here you go. Leave it for me. And if there's something you want me to cover, put it in the comments, right? And as always, if you haven't done so, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend. It helps the channel a great deal. Thank you so much for that. And you'll be helping a lot of other people. Have a great day.